Hi, I am Crystal Zaragoza. I am the board secretary for the Midwest Color Guard Circuit, and I'm also going into my 7th year as the Color Guard director at Downers Grove North High School. I today am going to be talking about how you can be an effective virtual instructor. So there's a lot of things that I've kind of learned along the way. There are a lot of other ways to do this, and I know a lot of people are really experimenting in a lot of really great ways right now, and trying to figure out what works really well for you as an instructor and what works really well for your students. So I'm just going to share kind of the tips and tricks that I have learned along the way so far, and advice to providing advice to those of you that maybe are looking for a good comprehensive view of certain ways that you could set things up. And there are obviously plenty of other ways to do this, and I would definitely encourage you to kind of do your own research as well and explore in those areas. But for now, I'm going to share with you a few ideas along the way. So we're just going to get started here. All right, so let's see here. As I mentioned, my name is Crystal. So we're just going to pop right in. Many of you have probably already gone through your audition processes, and if you haven't, that's a-okay. I know that we're all trying to adapt to this kind of crazy COVID world right now. So if you haven't, don't be alarmed. There are a lot of ways that you can get the word out really well and recruit. So I'm sharing here a number of ways that you can recruit. Some of these are methods that I used, and some of them are other, ideas that kind of came up along the way. We found a certain mix to be really useful at our school, but there's just, depending on what works for your particular situation in your school and what you're comfortable with, and what you might be allowed as well, can really make a difference. So in terms of recruiting and spreading the word, I was personally really nervous in this area to begin with. I was really concerned that our numbers were going to experience a really significant drop with not really being able to recruit in our same ways, announcements at the school, posters around the school, things like that, being able to have more direct outreach to the junior highs. So that was definitely an area that I was nervous, but after trying out a few different methods, I was very pleasantly surprised to find that our numbers actually did not drop at all. So it just requires a little bit of finessing and trying new ways to do your recruiting this year in a more virtual setting. So some of the recommendations along the way, you really utilize social media. So we especially posted on Instagram. We have a fairly decent following there. Linked a Google form to that, so I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. But you can also try to, get the hype going via TikTok, Snapchat, kind of those things that your students are going to be using more and that other students within the school body are going to be exposed to a little bit more. Facebook is a good one too, although students don't tend to use Facebook quite as much, but it just kind of depends from student to student as well. But that's also a good way to get the word out to families and parents that might be trying to find out for their sons and daughters about color guard tryouts. Another thing is you can look into sending a blast email to all the students within your school. So typically this is a no-no for us, where we're not really allowed to send blast emails about things like this. But in this COVID world, we were able to get an exception this year. So obviously this applies mostly to scholastic units, but that is a really good way to just let the student body know that, hey, we have, tryouts coming up and this is the way that we're going to do it. Let us know if you're interested. Connecting with junior high band directors is a really good way to spread the word as well to your incoming freshmen from your main feeder schools. You can also try to reach out to just other junior high contacts in general. If you might be able to reach the administrators there, you might be able to make it even more widespread outside of the bands, depending on how your program allows it. If your program requires that students are a part of band or not required to be a part of band, that will vary from school to school. You can also post in apps like Nextdoor or in local Facebook groups for moms. That's a really good way to get the word out with your families, especially that might be looking into getting details and may not know who to get in touch with or how to reach out to anybody. You can also talk to your current and your former members of the team. Really ask them to try and spread the word via their social media channels especially. And if they have younger siblings, ask them to see if their younger siblings might try to spread the word at the junior high level as well. We did some of that, and I think that really helped increase our number for incoming freshmen, which was great. And then once you have that ability to get the word out, what I did when I was getting the word out is I provided a link to a Google form, and it was just an interest form where I could collect the kind of information that I needed, you know, contact information, finding out availability, things like that, trying to figure out, you know, what they're interested in terms of, we actually do our auditions for Color Guard and Winter Guard at the same time. So kind of finding out where the interest was between seasons. So there's a lot of great ways that you can try to reach everybody to, first of all, let them know that you are holding auditions and trying to get the information you need to share out to the appropriate people what's happening. So I would definitely encourage that. So this is just an example here of the beginning of the interest form that I had sent out and provided the link for, and we got really great response from this. It was super helpful. I also included a box at the end there for any additional questions, which actually was very helpful. So anything that wasn't covered or anything that people had qualms about in the beginning, I was able to address those questions before popping into the actual audition process. So that was a great thing to include. Okay. So if you, once again, are still doing your virtual auditions, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this because I do think that a lot of guards have kind of already gone past this phase, but some of you may have not. So I'm just going to give you a brief idea of what we ended up doing. So after I got those Google interest form results, I did a Zoom info session, and that was for students and for parents, so they could get some information, just kind of went over, you know, the schedule and what those requirements are going to be, cost, things like that, you know, the logistical things that are really important for helping make the decision to begin with, whether people want to continue on with the audition. And then we also did a curbside pickup after that. So when we do our audition process, we only audition on flag to begin with. So, you know, got that scheduled. We have a little roundabout at the school. So students came, drove up, I had a mask on, and I just popped open their back trunk or their back hatch, loaded up the flag and sent them on their merry way. And that was a really great way to get equipment in the hands of our students. And you may have restrictions at your school about getting into the school. I had to schedule a specific time to be able to grab equipment and had great support from my band director in that way to get the equipment we needed. So there are ways to kind of make that happen as well. All right, so once your students that are interested in auditioning have that equipment in their hands, I would very much so encourage introducing yourself in a video message. You don't have that ability in person to be able to connect with students in the same way that you normally would. And this kind of puts, you know, put a personality, helps connect the students to who's going to be teaching them throughout the audition process. And it's just a great way to get the kids jazzed and, you know, really bring up that energy and that positivity as they embark on this maybe not so fun process. Nobody really wants to be doing a virtual audition. So it's a great way to, you know, try to be really encouraging in the beginning and also just reinforcing that everybody should really be patient with themselves because this is not an easy thing to do. So with that, I then sent out video tutorials. So the way that I did it is I staged it out where I just send like a handful of videos from week to week. So with those video tutorials, I kind of started with like easier ones, but also trying to mix in like a toss or two each time. And that way people weren't getting bored with, just doing drop spins and doing cones and things like that. I'm trying to mix in, some easier tosses for some fun challenges in between. But I liked parsing it out from week to week so that people could spend a week working on the skills and really improving on those skills, and then doing the next send of another set of skills. So I ended up doing, I want to say, 5 weeks of this. We started back in April when we did our curbside pickup. And then I ended up putting together a step-by-step tutorial as well on the actual the audition routine. So there was a step-by-step video for that. And there was also a video for, like the front view, the back view of the routine. We'll kind of get into that and the importance of the back view in a little bit here. But I also put together kind of this learning schedule so I can map out for myself when things would be sent. And being organized in that way really helped me personally stay on track with making sure I was holding myself accountable, but also, making sure I was communicating well with students about what was upcoming. All right, so a few other things that, resources that we basically provided to students that were auditioning along the way were to assign the students in, basically like virtual practice groups. And we typically will assign people in practice groups that they can work with while they're working on their audition. So they have some former members that they can continue to build their skills with and detail their technique with. So that was really great. And they were able to meet in smaller video groups leading up to their audition to ask specific questions there. And then we also offered virtual office hours. So I have to thank our winter guard assistant, Kate. She had this brilliant idea and it was wonderful. And you'll have varying degrees of success in terms of people who take advantage of it and people who don't. But it's a really nice way for students to be able to touch base with you as an instructor with specific questions that they might not be clear in the video tutorials. So that's something that we offered as well. And then I also like to do a mix of kind of that asynchronous where you're not really doing it at the same time together, along with synchronous options. So we ended up offering a virtual clinic as well that we were doing live. And we'll get into the details of that in a little bit. But with the synchronous clinic, that's really, really good to have that mix so that you can really see maybe some of the pitfalls that people are falling into with their technique and trying to correct that along the way so that they aren't continually practicing the wrong technique, all summer long if you're doing, for example, virtual practices all summer. So I would definitely encourage kind of mixing that in. And then in the end, we had students submit audition videos. So that was how we ended up kind of reviewing where everybody was at the end of the process. And we posted our roster on our band blog after that. And that was our audition process kind of in a nutshell. And you'll see here, I've got Zoom. Zoom is my personal preference in terms of video conferencing tools go. I find it to have some great tools that are really useful, but I'm sure there are other great tools out there that maybe you're more familiar with and you might want to use more. But that's the one that I'm going to kind of touch on a little bit more as we go along. Okay, so beginning the season. So holding a Zoom team meeting at the beginning of the season is a really great idea. So this is a meeting where you can kind of talk about what your specific plan is going to be. So if it's going to be like a virtual practice plan, what the expectations are along with that. And we'll kind of go into a little bit more detail on kind of the expectations I put in place for students and kind of how the logistics were going to work with doing our virtual practices. And then I always, at the beginning of the season, like to spend the first practice really detailing the rules in terms of, this might be your dress code and, being a good team member and things like that. And then also talking about team culture and kind of the principles that we hold as a team, you know, talking about sportsmanship and the personal responsibility that you hold and being an effective member of the team. So there's a lot more detail that goes into that, but those are things that I find really, really important to set the stage for the beginning of the season. So we had a Zoom team meeting to discuss some of those things. And then we also mixed in between kind of those boring aspects of the rules and expectations and stuff, we mixed in some icebreakers so we could really get to know each other a little bit more. And that can be a little bit more challenging virtually, but I think it's very, very, very important to do so that your team can start to bond more. So I'll give some more ideas later on what those icebreakers can look like, some that we've done and other ideas for you as well. But for our first team meeting, it was a lot of, you know, just kind of going around one person at a time, you know, telling a little bit about themselves, some fun facts, things like that. That can be a really good way to start to connect and kind of see where those common interests lie. And then for us, we also offered a second curbside pickup. So you can see a photo of me there from when I did that second curbside pickup, rocking the school spirit with the purple. So with that one, I had only shared out flags for the first curbside pickup. So that second one was to make sure that everybody had a rifle in their hand, because we always train rifle during the summer. That will vary from guard to guard, of course. And then getting sabers in the hands of those looking to try out for weapons lines. And then also, you know, anything that the students might need for maintaining their equipment over the summer. Depending on your guard, you might already ask students to just buy this out of their own pocket, and that's great. If there are certain things that you provide as a guard to the students that they're not buying out of their own pocket, like practice silk strapping tape, pads, weights for the flagpoles, things like that. The curbside pickup is a great time to get an inventory of what you need to get to your students and getting it out to them at that point in time. Okay. So I find that what I've found so far is that a diversification of learning methods is really important. You know, something that we've always found as instructors is that students learn in a variety of ways, and you have to be able to mold your teaching to those different learning styles. And that's not going to be any different in this virtual setting. So I've tried to offer a good mix of ways to keep everybody engaged and reinforcing good technique. And I found that the mix really helps, you know, that technique learning to be even more effective. So I've done a combination of teaching tutorials via video, providing sheets that have technique details in them, or count sheets if you're into the routine learning portion of things. Video assignments, those are huge. So video assignments, and not just assigning, you know, like an exercise for them to do, but also providing feedback when they do turn in the video assignment as to areas of improvement, and really giving good detail as to what each student as an individual can be working on in those moments. So video assignments I find are really, really key, especially virtually right now. And then, you know, asking students to practice. So we set up students with like a sibling. I think this is pretty common for a lot of guards, where you'll have like big sister, little sister, big sibling, little sibling, types of things. So that I've really encouraged as a great resource for students to try to do more one-on-one virtual practices with each other, so that you know, people can get that individualized attention that they need on their technique, and just, you know, kind of build that bond with somebody that they can start to look up to. We'll usually pair somebody who is a former member on the team who's more experienced with one of the newer members on the team, and we found that to work really well. And then like I said, the synchronous sessions for virtual practice, mixing that in to clean up any remaining technique issues that aren't really coming through just yet on the video tutorials, or even in providing the constructive feedback from the video assignments. So I would definitely encourage that really healthy mix of the synchronous and asynchronous teaching methods. I would put more emphasis on the asynchronous, because doing live Zoom practices can be very challenging. And so I find it important to try to do that mix, but more heavily so on, you know, the things that they can do on their own time, when they have a better tech setup and it's not so challenging to try to get, you know, a Wi-Fi signal consistently with everybody on the line. Okay, so this is just a quick snapshot of my YouTube channel. So these are a number of the tutorials that I've sent out fairly recently. So this is the way that I prefer to set it up. I know that a lot of other instructors will set up a similar type of thing where they have video tutorials that they can send out to their membership. And there's a lot of different platforms that you can use. I know Google Classroom is a really good one if you have all of your students, like including your incoming freshmen, connected to that, which I know can be a challenge when it comes to incoming freshmen. But this is one way that you can do it. And what's great about this is you can also see the view counts. So you know which ones are getting the click-throughs and people are actually spending some time on. Obviously, you can see here that the toss is always the most popular because it's so exciting to learn how to toss. And then, you know, a spin exercise with drop spins is maybe not as exciting. So that can be really good for accountability and understanding what your membership is really working on and spending time on. So that can be very, very helpful. I'm just sharing here our week 1 of our video assignment, kind of what I put out to everyone. So I had 4 different video assignments for this week. And what I ended up doing is I actually provided beats per minute that were going to be different for newcomers and returning members for each exercise to be executed at, you know, understanding that newcomers, they are not going to be able to do it at, you know, top speed right away, and trying to be a little bit forgiving with that, but, you know, expecting a lot more out of our returning members and, you know, wanting them to be able to execute and have a higher achievement level at those faster speeds. So and then in there, I also linked to a front view and a back view of just a demonstration of it. In addition to this, not shown on the sheet, I had broken down these skills at great detail in some other previous fundamentals videos that they could refer back to. I've just been having students upload their videos to Google Drive or to Google Photos album, and then just sharing the link from there. I've personally found that that seems to be the best method for successfully actually getting the video shared, because those attachments can be quite large. So just something to keep in mind. Okay, so live Zoom practices. I'm going to be completely honest. Live Zoom practices can be really challenging and they can be really exhausting. It's a lot to try and manage. The more people you have supporting you when it comes to live Zoom practices, the more successful you can most likely be. But you also have that ability to, you know, kind of do it all yourself if you are, you know, in that situation as well. But don't be afraid to lean on your students, especially your student leaders, to help you along the way and support you with these Zoom practices. All right, so I'm just going to start out with a few logistics here that are really important. So something that you really, really want to keep in mind when it comes to you know, doing a Zoom practice or a video practice of some sort is that the technology is going to be limiting. Not only are you going to be concerned about connectivity and making sure that, you know, you don't have screens freezing all the time, things like that, but you also need to be conscious of the fact that the devices that you and your students are using only are going to last so long. So I tend to limit our live virtual practices to just an hour and a half max. And that seems to be kind of that happy medium of still trying to get some things done in that live setting, but also allowing the devices to last long enough throughout before dying. So as you'll see, I really emphasize the major importance of having your devices fully charged ahead of time. That is so, so key, especially you as the host of the meeting. If your device dies, your meeting has ended, your practice has ended, and then your students are going to be scrambling and not really know what happened. So make sure that you have everything fully charged. Any device that you might be using, whether it's iPad, iPhone, laptop, if you're using, you know, like a Bluetooth, something like that, any sort of, you know, music device you might be using, just making sure that all of those devices are fully charged. And then with that in mind, you also want to make sure that you're not, I would say, wasting your time so much, your live time together. So obviously stretching and warming up are super, super important when it comes to practices. And you want to make sure that your students are doing this so that, you know, you're preventing injury and making sure that they are well warmed up before you start to go into spinning. So striking that balance again, something to consider is to send a pre-recording stretching routine and a warm-up video to your students in advance that they can use. And that way they can make sure that they're properly warmed up. They could probably be doing a lot of this indoors while they're still plugged into an outlet, and be fully stretched and warmed up before they come outside and log on. And this is something that as they do more over time, especially like a warm-up exercise, they might not even need the video, and they can just start to warm up their hands. Okay, so another important thing is to do your very, very best to set up in a quiet, private space. That's really going to help you to cut down on any distractions, and ask your students to do the same if they can. So a nice, quiet backyard is great. I live in the city of Chicago, so that's a little bit more of a challenge for me. But I have tried to find my little quiet places of the world here to cut down on those distractions as much as possible. I got this suggestion. This was something that Marie Chapinski had noticed in a clinic that she had observed, this next point here. So consider wearing darker clothing. This is going to allow your students to see the better details of the hand placements on your equipment. So for example, don't wear a white shirt when you're up against a white rifle. They're not really going to be able to see that contrast very well. So that's going to be really key to keep in mind as well. So a big thing that I've been trying to do a mix of is I'll start by facing the camera when I'm kind of showing hand placement and which way your hand should be switched, things like that. But then make sure that you're turning around often to demonstrate to your members. It can be really confusing to see a mirrored view for students, especially ones that are really starting out with color guard. It can be confusing to try to understand exactly what's happening in that moment. So make sure that you're doing that mix really well. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. All right, so setting up your tech. So over here, I've just got a photo of, this is a photo that I have of just a tech setup, a very basic tech setup that I used for a clinic. So I've got a tripod here that I can connect an iPad up to. So I liked doing an iPad because it allowed me to put it up on a tripod, but it also is bigger than my phone screen, so I could see multiple students at once. So that is one way to do it, but on a regular practice, I have multiple devices going, because during the fall season, I am a one-woman show in that regard. So I'll be, managing breakout rooms and things like that. But we'll talk in a little bit about how you can utilize your captains for those types of things too. So I'm just going to say again, make sure all of your devices are charged in advance, super key. Utilize a Bluetooth headset if you can. So this is going to make it more hands-free for you, which is going to be really important. And then you won't have cords getting in the way as you're trying to spin and demonstrate. This will also allow you to step back a reasonable distance away from your device so that, your students can see a full body view of you. And then it kind of allows you that freedom to kind of go back to the screen when you need to take a closer look at how your students are doing. So that is a really good, useful thing to use. If you don't have a Bluetooth headset, another way that you can go about it that I have used before when my Bluetooth failed me, was actually signing in on my Zoom account twice. So one I dedicated to the video, and then I muted the video version and turned the volume all the way down on that, and then connected through a wired headset on my phone so that I could have the audio going through that, so I could be heard in the microphone and I could hear what the students were saying every time they might go off of mute. So that's one way you could do it as well. And then if you are looking to play music, which you can, it's not totally unheard of. There are ways that you can set it up where it's a little less glitchy. So if you sign in with a second device to share your audio from that device only, that can be really helpful from cutting down on lag. So that could be a great way to do it if you're looking to share that audio. But a lot of times, you know, your students are going to experience lag, and they also might have troubles with hearing the music coming through. There is a setting on Zoom where you can actually share your computer audio, so it's not just like trying to pick up audio coming through your speakers. So that can be useful, but a lot of times that's going to end up being a little bit tricky. So just something to keep in mind, and really work more with counts than music, I would say. All right. So as I showed in that photo, you know, try to set up on a tripod or a stand, something that's more elevated so that your students are getting that front view, like really kind of that front true view of, you know, what your pitch is going to look like with your equipment, so that it doesn't have this distorted view to it. And then, you know, just making sure that it's a full head to toe view as well, so that your students can see all of you within frame as you're teaching choreography, seeing what your feet are doing, your hands are doing, your equipment's doing, and then just make sure that you're staying within frame also as you're moving with the choreography. At the very beginning of setting up your practice, make sure that all of your participants are muted. That's going to cut down majorly on feedback. I'll talk a little bit more about how I kind of manage questions and communication. And then if you have unlimited data, I would highly encourage you to just try disconnecting from your Wi-Fi completely, unless you happen to have a really strong connection right off of your like back deck or something like that, where you can stay connected to Wi-Fi. But a lot of times that can be really spotty. So I found just using data and then also using my phone as a hotspot for my other devices has been the most effective for me. Okay. So you also want to communicate to your students how they should be setting up their tech. So I actually have this document that I put together back when we did our very first clinic, and I shared it again with students once we started in on our Zoom practices. So I'm just going to kind of go through that briefly here. So this is how students can, you know, set up their tech to make sure that they have a successful Zoom experience. So once again, strong Wi-Fi connection or using data if they can, making sure they're in a well-suited, large enough space to spin in, stretching and warming up in advance, as I mentioned, making sure everything's fully charged, muting audio upon joining the meeting. Ask your students to rename their screens to their first name and last name. So if they happen to be like signing onto a parent's account or a brother-sister's account, something like that, you're just gonna wanna make sure that they rename it so that you know who you're talking to, especially in the beginning as you're still getting to know your students, which is a little bit trickier virtually, but in no time, if you have the students renaming their screens, that'll make that a lot easier for you. So you can just see in there the way to go about that if you're using Zoom. And then another really great thing that students can do is they can actually pin your video. So this is going to allow your specific thumbnail to appear larger on their screen, so that you know, the things that you're demonstrating are going to be most highlighted and they're not seeing a bunch of different screens all at once. So there's a couple ways to do that. I just have that detailed below. It's going to depend on if they're using a mobile device, computer. You can pin it in a couple different ways. And then, as I mentioned before, you know, try to use a Bluetooth headset of sorts or even a Bluetooth speaker, so that you can increase the volume and kind of hear what people are saying. This will more so work for your students if they're trying to hear, you know, through a Bluetooth speaker. If it gets, you know, a nice volume to it, that can be helpful. And students don't have to use a mic so much, so that can be a good way to go about it. And then once again for them, trying to find a stand or a tripod or a table that they can place the screen at eye level so you can get a good front view of kind of how things are looking on their end. And then from there, I also send out a variety of hand signals that we can use to communicate throughout practice. So here are the hand signals that we use. And, there's many different ways that you can go about this, but there's a lot of times as an instructor that you're going to want to ask a question and you're going to want to be able to get feedback on it. So you're going to say, as you're learning choreography, like, okay, do you guys want to try it with counts? Do you want to try it with music? Like, how are you feeling? Are we doing well? So this is just kind of a brief idea of the hand signals that we have set up for our Zoom practices. The big one that I'll just point out is whenever you ask anybody if they have questions, or if they do have a question kind of in the middle, just have them throw up the timeout sign, but make sure that you give them a chance to actually type their question into the chat. A lot of things that I've seen from other instructors, I've been kind of, popping into different, clinics, things like that, is they'll ask, hey, does anybody have questions? But then they move on really quickly. So you have to give that ability for students to actually get their question typed up. They have to go over to their device, type it, send it. So make sure that you're accounting for those types of things. But you can just kind of take a look at some of those other examples that I have there. All right, managing communications. So as I mentioned, the hand signals are good to set up in advance so that everybody's kind of on the same page there. It's one less thing that you then have to do when you're live on your Zoom practice. Keeping everybody on mute throughout. So, people are going to want to ask questions, right? So ask your students to type those questions into the chat box. Also make sure that they're staying in communication with you throughout. So if they need to like run to the restroom or something like that, just have them, type that to you in the chat so that you know that they just didn't decide they didn't want to be at practice anymore. And then this is really important. If you have the ability to have, if you have another staff member, or if you don't have another staff member, ask one of your captains to monitor the chat box for you. So having that extra person kind of managing the right there on the computer screen type of thing is so helpful. They can, keep an eye on the chat box for any questions that can come in. They can help troubleshoot tech issues if somebody can't hear something or they need to leave and come back in or things like that. They can also manage your breakout rooms for you. If you have your staff member or captain managing breakout rooms, you will need to just assign them as the host in order to do so. But it's really helpful. So that's one less thing that you have to kind of get frazzled by and one less thing that you have to manage on top of everything else. Another great thing about that is that staff member or that captain can be another set of eyes on the video feed to members, so they can help relay feedback to you where they're just like the only person going off of mute and saying, oh, I think we need to go back and revisit that thing that we just went over. Not everybody was getting it. Can you cover this in more detail? I don't think everybody's getting this hand placement, things like that. And then also being able to say, yeah, we're good. Everybody's doing great. Let's go ahead and keep going. So that can be so beneficial. And then when you're teaching choreography, I mentioned already the idea of turning around often and making sure that you're giving what you would consider the back view, as if they were standing in a block with you and just looking right behind you, so that they can know the actual direction of their flag and what that should look like. That can be really confusing. But another thing that you want to keep in mind is being very vocal in how you verbalize the choreography. So you can't just say, oh, it looks like this, and then you just show your hands, because that's going to be a little bit more confusing when you're not live like that, and in that in-person setting at least. So make sure you're saying left hand, right hand, left leg, left foot, things like that, where you're really breaking that down. This is also going to help in that idea of the diversification of hitting on those different learning styles. So those that, really take to kind of hearing what they need to be doing versus seeing what they need to be doing, this is going to help with that. All right. So ways to maximize your technology. My favorite thing in Zoom is using breakout rooms. So I kind of just showed a couple screenshots here on the side. So with this, there is going to be a breakout rooms button usually at bottom of your screen, you can either have it go automatic, or you can manually put people in if you want to assign certain people to certain rooms. And then there at the bottom, that last little screenshot there shows what those different breakout rooms would kind of start to look like as you start to assign them out. So there are a lot of ways that you can really use breakout rooms. So one of the biggest examples I've been using it for is after I teach a skill or a section of choreography, we'll place participants into the breakout room, and then, you know, putting somebody in there that knows what they're doing. So either if you have some staff to go around, you know, putting a staff member in there, or a captain in there, or a strong vet, so that you have people that can really help out in that way, and really work on honing in on some of those techniques that are easier to do when there's not so many people that you have to look over. You could also place it into even smaller things, so doing it in pairs, like doing your siblings, your, you know, big sister, little sister type of thing. This could also be useful if you want to hold sectionals, so you could just do breakout rooms for, you know, flags, dancers, rifles, sabers in different rooms. And then you could also use breakout rooms to divide based on levels. So you could do beginner, intermediate, advanced, things like that. So this is really going to depend on your resources, if you have multiple staff, or if you have strong captains that can really lead those little sectionals, that can be really, really helpful. So if you are trying to do all the things at once, you will want to have a separate computer for being able to do the breakout rooms. But if you're lucky to have somebody that can kind of manage that tech, you will need to put them as the host, and then that person can also kind of put you as that more visual instructor into the different breakout rooms. So if you wanted to pop into different breakout rooms to see how the small groups are doing and checking in on them, that's something you can do as well, which is kind of neat. Okay, so we always want to have a rain plan, and you know, normally we're able to kind of tough it out with the rain during a normal practice setting. Not so big of a deal unless, you know, we have to go inside for lightning, things like that. But when it comes to virtual practices, we have our very expensive electronic devices with us. So rain plan is a must, so that we don't ruin all these electronic devices trying to practice in the rain. If you do not live in the same town as the school you teach, so as I mentioned earlier, I live in Chicago, my students live in Downers Grove, that can be a bit of a difference sometimes as far as weather is concerned. So just keep in mind that the weather may vary depending on where you live and where your students live, and just kind of keep an eye on both, kind of leading up to your practice. But in terms of rain plan, I would recommend not really scheduling a dance technique day per se. I would save your dance technique days for when the weather does not cooperate, because that's something that almost everybody should be able to do inside pretty well. So that is a good one to just hold in your back pocket until you need it. Another thing that you could do, if this is something you like to do with your group, is to have another rain plan. That can be a time when it's raining that you decide to teach proper taping technique for equipment. So that's another thing that you could do on a rain day. Okay, so tips for increased participation. I know that this is one that a lot of people are kind of struggling with right now in the virtual setting. And it's hard to hold students accountable in the same way, but there are a lot of ways that you can do that, just depending on how your team is structured and what you offer. So for example, our band still does pregame. And we have different pregame spots. So we have our flags that spin, and then we have banner spots. And so that is a position that we have to audition, is for the flag spots. And so things like that can be really motivating to your students. You know, whether or not they'll make a pregame spot, whether or not they'll make weapons line, you know, encouraging of, you know, being placed in a more prominent drill spot. Things like that can be big motivators for students to want to continue to practice and to drive their own personal growth. You also want to use the names of students, especially your new ones who, you're still trying to get to know, really try to make that personal connection and make sure you're complimenting them along the way to really help with engagement. They're going to feel really good when they get a compliment at a practice. And that's really just going to motivate them even more to want to keep doing well and keep practicing. And then also you want to keep your students interested. So one way of doing that is mixing in some virtual team building activities and just fun activities in general for team bonding. So not just, work every time you get on video. Try to pepper in some times where you're going to try to get to know each other, because that's going to be something that you're going to have to schedule time for, essentially. You're not going to just have water breaks where students are chit-chatting like normal. So it's something that you want to plan for a little bit, and that's actually something that is good for rain day as well. So consider having some team building activities you can do inside. That would be good to pull out of your back pocket on a rain day. Okay, so I'm gonna give you some examples for this on how you can work on building that team culture in this virtual setting. A lot of these are actually ones that we have used, and then others are ones that we kind of are, have on the docket for future use. So in terms of like a virtual team bonding opportunity, like I mentioned earlier, a Zoom call with icebreaker questions is really good. Just have one person go off mute at a time, let them speak, kind of have their time to share, and then you move on to the next person. This also cuts down on the tech issues that you might be up against. A fun one that we did, especially kind of early in COVID, was we offered a fun little scavenger hunt. So this was with our former members that we knew had a lot of these things, but I placed a little screenshot on the side there. We use Remind. It's an app for a lot of our reminders and announcements. So when we were on the Zoom call, I put this little sent this little like impromptu packing checklist to them, and they were being timed, and they all had to like run around their house and try to find these objects really quickly. It was really fun. We were just laughing so much as the students just scurried out of screen. It was pretty funny. And then we just kind of put in there like, oh, 5-second penalty for everything that you can't find. And it was just like a really fun, more active thing for the students to do at that point in time, and just really brought up the spirits immediately. So I would encourage that one. That was really fun. Additional activities that you could do. So during our Winter Guard showcase that we do, we typically would have a parent performance. Since we couldn't do our showcase this year, we said, hey, students, how about you try to teach your families or your parents or your siblings or somebody a routine and share a video. And we had, they had a riot. They had a lot of fun with this. We shared them via social media. Had a little voting via social media too, and it was really fun. So, and it's also a really cool way for your students to engage with your parents and their families, which is kind of a cool way to get them connected to Guard a little bit more. Another one you could do is like a team add-on routine where you have somebody doing just a short snippet of choreography, tossing out a frame, and then somebody catches it as it comes into their frame, and then you just kind of keep doing that. So that's a fun one to kind of put that compilation together. We did an activity where the students were asked to basically put together an art piece that shows what color Guard means to them, and it was really neat to see kind of what our students came up with for that. Trick tutorials are always fun. This is also a really great way to keep your vets engaged, really challenge them a lot more. And also with this last point, the short routines to learn just for fun. That's something that you want to strike the balance on. Is you don't want to keep your vets so at bay that they're bored. That's going to be really difficult because you are going to have to slow down a lot in the virtual setting. So being able to challenge them with some additional things is a really good idea too. Okay. Personally, I have not had to worry about this this particular issue, But I know that this is something that a lot of instructors are facing right now, so I do want to touch on this point. And it is challenging. So there are students that might not have internet access, and that can be a big challenge for sure. First of all, I would check in to see if there's anything. There's a lot of companies out there these days that are trying to offer, supplemental ways for families to get internet access. So that can be, and even through the school, I know some schools have been offering hotspots to their students. It's really going to depend on your school, the kind of funding they have, and then also the services in your area and what they're offering. So I think that should be your first resource, is seeing if there is a way that your students can get internet access. If they can't, look into providing them with a packet. So kind of what I was talking about before, having a schedule of, the summer learning of what's going to be covered from week to week and what to try to hit on each week. You could try to burn a DVD or provide a thumb drive with the video teaching tutorials that you're going to be providing to the other students over the summer. So that can be a good way to get them the resources that they need as well. Depending on the comfort level of your students and their parents, something else you could look into in as safe a way as possible is for those students who don't have internet access, they might be able to even join another team member that does have internet access in their yard, at a nice safe distance during Zoom practices, to still be part of the live practice in that way. So that could be something to look into as well. Okay, I know that a lot of teams are also starting to transition to more of a hybrid, or just in general. There are just a few lucky teams that have been able to start to do some in-person practices. The ones that I know of so far, there has been a limit where you can only have 10 people at the practice. So with that in mind, I would still recommend considering doing a mix of video assignments and in-person practices. Just think about your own personal stamina with trying to teach your guard in rounds. So this is obviously going to differ depending on how large your guard is. We have 24 people on our guard this year, so I would have to do this in 3 different rounds, and that can be done in a few different ways where you're teaching the same thing 3 different times, which is a little bit exhausting, but we're going to do what we got to do. Or you could consider doing that in sectionals where you have flags come for the first session, rifles the next session, sabers the next session, something like that. This is also going to be, if you have more staff, you're going to be at an advantage here because you'll be able to kind of spread out kind of the teaching a little bit more amongst your staff. So that's something you can consider. But otherwise, having that mix of video assignments and in-person practices can still be really helpful for students to be able to practice some more, on their own at home and get some more individualized feedback that you might not be able to do when you're spread quite as thin between multiple practices. With doing this type of idea, I would still recommend having your students stretch and warm up at home before coming to practice so that you can just hit the ground running once they arrive. For me, as I'm looking into this as a possibility that might hopefully happen at some point, my plan will be to assign 1 captain per shift as a backup. So I'll be trying to place sibling pairings within the same group so they can continue to bond and work with the people that they have been working with. From the regulations that I've seen, everybody will be required to wear masks. Everybody will need to be spaced a safe distance apart. And then something I've also considered is that, the equipment that was checked out to students at their curbside pickup should be the same equipment that they bring to practice, the same equipment they spin at practice, and just try to cut down on any sort of cross-contamination of germs by sharing equipment. So they're just using their own equipment at practices. So I just kind of put a sample schedule in there of what my plan is if and when I'm so lucky to do some in-person practices. So this is kind of what my 3 rounds will look like. So I'll do an hour, 15 minutes per round and have just like a 5-minute transition in between, so that we don't have overcrowding or anything like that. So that is something to keep in mind. Other considerations, these are just some miscellaneous things that have crossed my mind recently. When it comes to ordering your uniforms, this is going to be maybe a little bit different depending on how you typically handle this process. It's possible that many of you have already placed your orders for this, especially with how long those costumes can take. But if you're able to, try to hold off as long as you are able before placing those orders. You just never really know what's going to happen with the season, right? So we want to be really conscious of not wasting the money of our students and not wasting your resources as a guard. So hold off as long as you can. But also, you know, if you do get to that point where you're ready to measure, make sure that you are sending a good measuring guide to the parents, showing them how to properly measure their son or daughter, so that they are doing it well, and also emphasize the importance of accurate measurements. You know, sometimes people want to be a size 10, but maybe aren't quite in a size 10, but it's really important, obviously, that we're getting the accurate measurements so that those uniforms are getting ordered in the way that they need to. So that's a good thing to emphasize for parents that maybe aren't used to measuring their children. All right, so managing expectations. We're kind of getting toward the end here, but managing expectations is going to be really important. And that's not just managing expectations for your students, but also managing your own expectations. Just be prepared to go at a much slower pace than usual. It's really important to be cognizant of your students' challenges as they're trying to learn in this environment. You're going to have your own challenges as an instructor, but also be aware of what's happening with them. You know, there's going to be connectivity issues. They might not be able to hear or see well, depending on what kind of tech setup they are able to have with the resources they have at home. I would absolutely encourage you to try taking 1 or 2 virtual classes on your own, so that you can get a feel for what it's like to, from the student perspective, to really understand that the challenges that a student does face trying to learn off of a screen. I have taken a number of virtual classes and I have learned so much in the process, and I think it has made me so much more empathetic for what the students are going through, and it has taught me to definitely slow down my pace. For students, especially those that are really starting out and trying to learn in that way. Also, just be realistic with yourself of what you can personally manage. You know, don't overload your schedule in this way. Doing Zoom practices can be pretty exhausting, as I mentioned earlier. So just make sure that you're taking care of yourself and you're not overloading it in that way. Be realistic with what, you know, video assignments you can assign, and if you really feel like you can get feedback to students in a timely manner, just find the right mix for you as an individual, and, you know, kind of go with that. And it's okay to, you know, kind of do your own mix and match of things and find what works for you. Be really patient with yourself and others, and with technology. This is really key. You're going to have days where it's a little frustrating, I'm sure, maybe more technology issues than you want on a given day. So really just try to be patient, breathe through it, and just, you know, try to be as encouraging of your students as you can. And they're going to deal with their own frustrations with technology. So just try to be encouraging, and just, you know, trying to be supportive along the way. And then be really flexible. So I think that we have all very much so understood that we have to have a backup plan recently. I think we all have a plan A, a plan B, a plan C, and maybe even a plan D. And we probably already scratched out our plan A, because, you know, plan A would have been being able to do our practices live and, you know, not be living in a COVID world. So that is something that you want to remain flexible on, and just always kind of have that idea in the back of your head of what you might need to flip through if things are not really going the way you want them to. And then a big thing as an instructor is to make sure that you can delegate whenever possible. So I gave a lot of examples of how you can lean on staff or captains or even strong vets in your program. And that's going to be really key. being able to delegate is so, so important because it's really hard to manage it on your own. And just, even if you can have captains that are sometimes sharing feedback with individuals on video assignments, try not to overload them, of course, but see what might feel reasonable over the summer, especially when students might have a little bit more time to work with, where they can maybe do some small group practices outside of like a larger group practice. So just really try to delegate when you can to take some of the load off yourself, because being a virtual instructor will take more time than usual. You have to dedicate more time and resources to it. So just be kind and realistic with yourself in that way too. So that is kind of my little presentation today. I hope that some of this was helpful. I hope it's not too overwhelming. If it is, or if you have any questions on anything that I went over today, I am more than happy to answer any questions that you might have. So please feel free. I've got my email down there, crystal.a.switzer@huskers.unl.edu. So feel free to just reach out if you have any questions, want any clarification, would like me to direct you to any resources that I might have mentioned, and I am more than happy to help you out. And I hope that you all have as good of an experience as you can making the best of this situation, and that you all have successful seasons in your own ways as we try to navigate these challenges. I know that we can all do it. So if you need anything, please let me know. All right, good luck, everyone.